So, once a year we do this. It's a very familiar activity that we take on. It's the one time a year we kind of go on a great big worldwide retreat together, all of us Christians, and we do two things. We take a look at who we are, and then we take a look at what we do. And then we try to close the gap between those two things, who we are and what we do. Who we are is out of our control. God made us, and we have absolutely no control over that. We are made by God in God's image, and there's not one thing we can do to change that. So the problem is, how do we wrap our minds around who we really are in order to do this Lenten work effectively? How do we figure out who we are? Well, on the one side, we know this from science class. We're animals. We're animals. We're vertebrates. We're mammals. That's who we are. We can be classified like the other living creatures on the earth. But when we approach who we are from that angle, it makes it seem like, oh, we're animals that have souls. But that's not really who we are. We're not animals with a soul. We're not beasts that happen to have souls. That's not the Christian view of who we are. The Christian view of who we are is that we are enfleshed spirits. This is what that means. It means that when God created us, God started by imagining our essence, imagined who we were. God imagined our souls and created what God imagined. And God loved it so much that God had to make it in flesh. God loved our souls so much, God wanted to see us in flesh. So we are not animals that happen to have souls. We are spirits that are enfleshed, that were made out of flesh. So this means that our flesh and our spirit are not separate. They can't be pulled apart. They go hand in hand. But one of them did come first. It was our spirit. Our spirit precedes our flesh. It's not like God saw us all sitting around like Cabbage Patch dolls and decided to give us souls. That's not how it works. God loved our souls and said, I've got to see this moving around in time and space. I want to see this soul moving around and walking on my creation. There is a very simple way, actually, to say this, and the great Jesuit scientist, Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, gave us these words. They're so helpful. Here's what he said. If you want to boil this all down, it's as simple as this. We are not human beings that are having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. That's who we are. So then when we realize that, if we can just open our minds to glimpse that a little bit, then the question becomes, so if we're enfleshed spirits, how might we expect an enfleshed spirit to move about the world? An enfleshed spirit, wouldn't you expect a person who's an enfleshed spirit to be graceful and grateful, to be wise, generous, to live with discipline? Lent is when we say, wow, I'm an enfleshed spirit. Do I act like that? Do I act with all of those qualities that one would expect from a spirit that was loved so much by God, God had to see it in flesh, moving around? If you're like me, Ash Wednesday is when we say, there's a gap there. I don't always act like an enfleshed spirit. I sometimes act like an animal who's annoyed he has a soul that I have to deal with, that I have to listen to. Ash Wednesday invites us each year to return to God, just exactly the way the prophet described it in the first reading. Return to God with your whole heart. Return to God, not separate, not trying to separate who we are from what we do, but bringing them together. So how do we do that? We rend our hearts, the prophet Joel says. Rend your hearts. Don't tear your garments. Open your hearts, and do it by praying more, by atoning, by admitting, by humbling, by working to close the gap. Because we have this incredible exalted identity, but if we look closely, we'll find that we also sometimes have petty, really lowly deeds that are not fitting for someone as noble as we are, being in flesh spirits. So we go into Lent with hope because we know that we can make progress. We know we can. Because we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.